Good morning, everybody. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And I'd like to start by saying we would like to respectfully acknowledge that UPC Okanagan is situated on the traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. I would also like to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many places near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. My name is Rod Rue. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Wealth and Relationship Services for Interior Savings Credit Union. Welcome to the 9th Annual Okanagan Embrace Aging Month, and thank you for joining us today. Embrace Aging is co-hosted by the Institute for Healthy Living and Chronic Disease Prevention at UBC Okanagan, Interior Savings Credit Union, and Interior Health. The Embrace Aging Month was launched 9 years ago to celebrate and raise awareness about positive aging. And we've once again organized a number of educational opportunities and events during the month of March. The sessions are designed for everyone, young and old, and focused on a variety of topics related to healthy aging and ways to improve quality of life among seniors and their family caregivers. Our goal is to inspire everyone to embrace positive aging. For the closed captioning, the box can be moved to your preferred place by clicking and dragging it to where you would like. To turn off closed captioning, select the live transcript button on the menu bar. You may have some questions during the presentation. What I'll do is I'll ask you to type the questions into the chat box, and I will monitor those, and I will either read them during the presentation and ask Anjali a question, or we'll read them at the end of the presentation. Today's event is brought to you by Interior Savings Credit Union, and today's session is digital assets. What are they, and why are they important in estate planning? So our speaker today is Anjali Inman. Anjali is a lawyer, mom, breast cancer survivor, and the founder and CEO of EstateBox, a digital life and legacy platform. She's used her vast knowledge and 15 years of experience in tech to build the EstateBox platform on the principles of privacy, security, and innovation. Anjali is a self-proclaimed lifelong learner and continues to educate herself and those around her. Anjali is passionate about proper planning, something that was really highlighted by her cancer journey, and is now using her love of learning to share this knowledge with others. Anjali, over to you.
Thanks, Rod, and thanks for having me today to talk about digital assets. It is something that I've become more keenly aware about since I got diagnosed with cancer, and by way of an update, I am doing fine. But that was a diagnosis that I didn't expect to receive, and really highlighted certain aspects of estate planning to me and why they're important at any point in your life, really no matter how old you are. So all to say, I'm delighted to be here to speak to you about digital assets. We've already really done this, thank you, Rod. And so with our time together, what I'd like to discuss first is explain what digital assets are. It's a term that not a lot of people are familiar with, but is being used more and more often. I want to touch on why they matter in estate planning. Like Rod said, I'm a lawyer by training, so digital assets and the law is of course going to be a small element of this. And then I'm going to give you some real world examples of issues that have arisen with digital assets. And then some practical advice. I'm going to share with you how you can manage some digital assets that are common to many of us, like Facebook and LinkedIn. And then let's talk about adding digital assets to your estate planning. And I will stop to see, Rod, if there have been any questions in the chat along the way, but we will also have time for Q&A at the end. So with that, my question for all of you is, do you have any digital assets? And it might be fun just to pop in the chat if the answer is yes or no, and what you think that they might be. So I might give you a moment just to throw those in. Okay, so your first thought might be that you don't have any, or if you do, that they're not very significant. But let's look at a few questions. So do you have an email or a Facebook account? Do you have a smartphone and maybe something where you store videos and photos? And do you have any rewards points that you collect through a credit card or a retail retailer? If the answer to any of those is yes, then you definitely have digital assets. So I like to think, typically when I explain what a digital asset is, I say it's really anything that has a username and a password to log into something. So almost any online account you have is a digital asset. Now, a lot of those accounts might not be worth anything, but a lot of them might have value to them, whether that's sentimental or financial value. So if you think of your rewards points accounts, some people, they hit the $1 million Aeroplan points. That account has significant value to them. If you don't collect those points very frequently, that account might not have value to you. Thinking about where you store your photos and your videos, those they may have financial value if you're a photographer, but for most of us, they have quite a lot of sentimental value if you store all those memories for your family. So what are digital assets? Like I said, anything of monetary or sentimental value that exists online or in a digital format. And so some examples of digital assets are credit card and loyalty rewards points, your email accounts, storage for your digital photos, music, or videos, any blogs or websites you might own, ebooks or audiobooks, especially if you've written those, online payment accounts like PayPal, your social media accounts certainly qualify as digital assets, and also cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, which are often just through an online portal, are digital assets. And we'll go through 2 examples of some significant cryptocurrency holding issues. So what's interesting about digital assets is during the pandemic, a lot of people moved to more activity online, even than they had before. And I can't remember the man's name, but I always think of this example. It was someone on Shark Tank talking about their father who lived in Manhattan at the time, who had no idea how to use a computer. But when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden was motivated to learn how to use Uber Eats and other delivery services so he could have things brought to him. And I think that's the case for a lot of people, especially older people. So what we've really seen is a lot more digital assets arising through the last 2 years that we've been in the pandemic. So why are digital assets important in an estate plan? First of all, a lot of these exist online. And so the days of an executor or a loved one being able to go through your home office and go through files and uncover paperwork to lead them to where some of your assets might be, those days are disappearing as we move towards a more paper-free life and more activity online. So without really documenting where all these assets are and how to access them, there may be no way for your executor or your loved ones to find them. And especially if those accounts, if those online or digital assets have significant value, your beneficiaries might be losing out on some of the wealth or memories that you've built along the way. So we want to plan for that accordingly, right? It also can end up costing your beneficiaries quite a bit of money to access some of them. And I'll touch on some of the real world examples of how digital assets have created significant issues for people. And additionally, not having access to your family photos or videos can add a lot of stress to your family. Okay. One of the other things I always love to mention is that digital assets are important to manage because one of the highest incidents of identity theft fraud occurs after people have passed away. And that's because a lot of their accounts remain open and they aren't monitored. And so quite often with identity theft cases, someone will receive a notification from someone that's passed away, and that will trigger them to ask why an account hasn't been closed. So it's important to also protect your assets by shutting down accounts as soon as you can after you've passed. So that would be your executor shutting them down. We definitely don't want your accounts to be hacked and personal information stolen. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on a few legal issues about digital assets. Maybe Rod, can I just ask you any questions so far?
So far, there's no questions yet, Anjali. Thanks.
Okay, let's just keep going. So digital assets and the law. So like I said, I'm a lawyer by training, so very curious, is there any legislation for digital assets? And basically the current privacy legislation doesn't allow executors or anyone who's administering an estate to access digital assets in an efficient manner. The exceptions to that statement are that Alberta and Saskatchewan do offer legislation. So given that there's, or in the other provinces other than Alberta and Saskatchewan, no one can access your digital assets unless you've specifically and explicitly provided that within your will. And later in the presentation, I'm going to give you an example of what the clause that you can look for in your will, what that looks like. Okay. The other issue with digital assets is that because we're Canadian, we don't live in the United States, obviously, but the majority of the tech giants are based in the US. And so that means when it comes to accessing accounts such as Gmail or Facebook, who we're really dealing with is an entity that's governed by a different legal framework. And so I'll give you some examples of people who have had to fight in the US court system to get access to some of their assets. Each of the US states has US fiduciary access laws, and that means that in order for us to get access to someone's US accounts, we have to go through the US court system and get court orders, which you can imagine becomes very costly and takes a long time, and is something I think we'd all want to avoid. So here's the first example is with a Canadian, so Carol Ann Noble from Toronto. Her husband had passed away from a rare form of spinal cancer, and they shared an Apple account, but he had the login. And so when he passed away, she lost access to that account, but wanted to regain access so she could publish a book about his journey, his spinal cancer journey. And so she spent 4 years in court with Apple to try to access this account. She was the executor and the sole beneficiary of her husband's estate, and she still had to go through this 4-year battle. Luckily, she turned to the media, and CBC ran a story. And after that, Apple did reach out to her and came to an agreement to give her access to her husband's account. So it does have a happy ending, this story, but the 4 years and expense of trying to fight for access, is something she would have certainly loved to avoid. The next example is Rachel Thompson from the UK. Her husband died without a will, and again had an Apple account where he stored all of the family's videos and photos. And she of course wanted to access those and spent 3 years and lots of money fighting to get access to that account. And eventually she did get a court order. Okay, so what can we learn from these legal cases? Both of these happened before Apple offered a legacy feature, which we'll touch on a bit later. And they could have been prevented if Apple had offered this feature a bit earlier. It also tells us that photos and videos are extremely valuable, and people are willing to go to great lengths and great expense to recover those. And the last point is that simply being someone's executor does not automatically grant you access to their digital assets. Okay, so I just want to touch on cryptocurrency. We could do a whole presentation on this, but I just really want to highlight some examples of how cryptocurrency can raise really unique estate planning issues when it comes to digital assets. So first of all, what is relevant to you to know about these examples is just the difference between private and public keys. So a public key, it allows people to send you money, cryptocurrency. So it would be like someone knowing where you bank. They can put money into your bank. but the private key is how you access those funds. So that would be like your bank saying, without this, you can't ever pull money out. And the private key is an extremely long number or a set of characters that is often stored on a flash drive. And so here's two examples. So Stephen Thomas had $250 million in Bitcoin, and he lost the sheet of paper where he'd written down his private key, which is what he needed to access the $250 million. And the way that cryptocurrency is built on the blockchain means that nobody else has that key. So he is the only person with that number who can access it. And so as of January 2021, he had 2 chances left to guess the password before it would automatically delete his private key, meaning 2 chances left to collect his $250 million. I don't know about you, but that's definitely an amount of money I would want to protect. The next example is James Howell. So he stored his private key, which again is that really long password, on a flash drive. He had $450 million in cryptocurrency, and he accidentally threw out that flash drive. Again, so that's the only place he stored this private key. And he has been trying to excavate his local landfill to try to find the key. And I think he's been repeatedly rejected. But you can imagine the effort that would go into excavating a landfill for $450 million. It might be worth it. So what can we learn from these cases? If they had just failed to record their private key somewhere safe, forget the fact that they actually lost their keys, their money would just be lost, and their beneficiaries would lose the benefit of that, $250 and $450 million. Not to say that everyone who owns crypto has that much money, they certainly don't, but it's an example of where wealth can be hidden in the form of a digital asset where there's no paper trail or easy way to access it. It's also really easy to overlook a flash drive if you're cleaning out someone's home, or throw out a piece of paper with a password on it when you don't know what that password might be for. And I sort of touched on this, but cryptocurrency is a decentralized system. So there is no recovery process like there is with the bank. No one can take any evidence of these crypto accounts to an entity and say, help me recover these funds. They're just simply lost. Okay, so I wanted to share with you some legacy features that are available for digital accounts. And these are accounts that are common to a lot of us. So Apple has a digital legacy feature, and you can add a legacy contact through your Apple account. The legacy contact is able to access your computer, your phone, your tablet, your iCloud, anything that you've linked to your Apple ID. And Apple provides an expiration date for how long the information is available, meaning that your executor or your legacy contact would have to take that information before it expires. So here we just have some screenshots of how you can go into your iPhone or other Apple device to activate this. First, you go into password and security. And then the next page that will pop up has this legacy contact feature. And then you simply go in and add your legacy contact. And don't worry about scribbling any of this down. We do have a handout that Jaquetta will send out after the presentation that has some links to where this information is also available. Okay. Facebook, also another digital asset that quite a lot of us have. So Facebook allows you also to add a legacy contact, and they'll be able to access all of the accounts as though they were you. The legacy contact will have the ability to remove or add your friends and make other changes to memorialize your account. So to activate this feature, when you go into your profile settings on Facebook, down at the bottom, you'll see memorialization settings. very similar to the Apple one. You can go in and add a legacy contact. And also you can opt for a delete after death. So if you don't want anyone to access your Facebook account or have it memorialized, you can just ask that it be deleted permanently. Okay, Google, also another one quite a few of us use. So Google calls theirs an inactive account manager, and it's not specifically meant for the death scenario, but it's also a tool if you just couldn't access your account for a while. So what you do in this situation is set up a trusted person who can access your account if you haven't been active on your account for a certain period of time. Now you can pick that amount of time. It can be as short as 3 months or as long as 18 months. And this is what it looks like when you go into your Google account to plan what happens to your data if you can't use your Google account anymore. So you can decide when Google should decide your account is inactive. That's going back to the amount of time, the 3 to 18 months. Choose who to notify and what to share. So their system will actually trigger a notification to the person you've designated as the contact. And then you can also decide if your Google account should be deleted. Okay. The last one I want to give you as an example is LinkedIn. So this one isn't as automated as the other ones. It gives you 3 options for an authorized person on your account. They can request to close or memorialize it, or report you as deceased. And LinkedIn will require a bunch of documentation and evidence to show that someone has the power to do that, and also that you passed away. So this is what their form looks like: information about the deceased member. They'll collect the name of the deceased person, their LinkedIn URL, and then some other details that will indicate your relationship to the person you're contacting, or you're trying to have their account shut down. That's just the second page of the form. Okay, does anyone have any questions before we motor on?
So currently, I don't see any questions in the chat as of yet. But of course, if you have a question, please type it into the chat and I'll be happy to ask the question to Anjali.
Perfect. Okay, so let's talk about incorporating digital assets into your estate plan. So this is sort of your action plan of what to do with this knowledge of digital assets. So first, you should take the time to record what your digital assets are and how your loved ones can access them. EstateBox, the platform that I've created, is a secure platform where you can enter those details to make sure that they're never lost or misplaced, and is also easy to update. So finding a platform like that where you can keep those details and share them with your loved ones and your executor will make that an easier lift. I think we also learned that we should store photos and videos in more than one place. And if we're storing them in the cloud, having a regular backup on an external hard drive is a good idea, and making sure our loved ones know where to find them. Okay. The other thing we talked about is using legacy contact features like the Facebook and Google and Apple and LinkedIn options that I walked through. But also those are only helpful if we opt into them. And the last one is really to ensure your will has a digital assets clause. And so if you're thinking, what does that look like? This is what it looks like. So this is just a clause that would be very standard nowadays in wills. Most lawyers would be including this, but it is a good idea to go check your will to see if you do have this clause. And if you don't, it's worth getting your will updated. If your will is over 10 years, you might not have this. And that would be a good sort of trigger a reminder for you to go maybe update your will.
Anjali, I have a couple of questions here now.
Yeah.
The first question is, should I share my passwords with my family?
Oh, that's a really good question. So the answer is probably not linear. So it would be worth sharing passwords with people you really trust, but there are password managers, where you could log all the passwords you have to every digital asset. And then in the event of your death, you could, sorry, I'm not explaining this very well. You can have a password to get into the password manager, which contains all of your passwords. And then you could put that password to the password manager somewhere secure. So upon your death or in an event of incapacity, your loved ones or executors could access all your passwords. Now, that's sort of tricky advice, because when we sign up for a lot of these platforms, their terms of service say you will not share your password. And if you do, they can lock you out, which is a lot of the trouble that these unfortunate people have had with Apple, is that we're not legally allowed to share our passwords, although we often do. And so then if you are in a situation where you try to use someone's password to get in and you get locked out, you might be locked out forever. So I don't think that the privacy legislation and the platforms we used, I don't think that they've figured this all out yet. So there's not really a good answer. I think privacy legislation is changing, and this is something that is being looked at more and more. But really, if you think about it, like 10 years ago, so many people didn't have email. People didn't have Facebook and Gmail. And so privacy legislation just hasn't kept up. So I don't feel like I've given you a good answer. The answer is really, it's complicated, Rod.
Okay, thanks, Anjali. A few more questions here. Another one is, would you regard digital access to a bank account to be a digital asset?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because it's sort of both. So you do have a physical asset in the sense you have a bank account at an institution that is like bricks and mortar that can be accessed with the help of the bank employees. But your username and your login is still a digital asset in the sense that it gives you access to those funds as well. So in that situation, it's both, but that's not the case with all bank accounts, like for example, or accounts that hold money, for example, cryptocurrency, right? Doesn't have that bricks and mortar element to it.
Another question we've got is, how safe is the cloud to store passwords?
I think maybe that question is really getting at, how do you vet a password manager? And I think everyone has to come to their own comfort level with how safe the cloud is. But most of our information with the entities we use, whether they're our bank or credit union or Facebook and Google, are all based in the cloud. And so I feel like there's so much I could say on this, because my background is in cybersecurity, but it's incumbent upon you to sort of vet who you're using and what information you're sharing with them and the security that they offer to you. And one of the things I always think about is, if you aren't paying for a service, then you are the product, and it's those kind of services that you want to be the most cautious about when you're sharing information. So I don't know if there was like a specific element to that question about what's being stored in a cloud, but I would think about the value of what you're offering, and if you're paying for it, and what security measures are there to protect your information.
Okay, great. I've got one more question for you, and then I'll let you continue. What does it cost to use EstateBox?
EstateBox is available online right now for $155 a year. We're about to roll out some new streams, which is really exciting to us. But I would be happy to offer any attendees to this session a discount. So I can also have Jaquetta send that out after the session as well.
Okay, great. Back to you.
Okay, so just going back to this digital assets clause, I would encourage everyone to take a look at their will. I say that assuming everyone here has a will, but if you don't, please also go get a will done. There are some great online will providers that might be suitable and are quite inexpensive for you. And all of those offer a similar clause to this. So then you know you're covered. But please do go look at your legal documentation, your will, and see that this clause is here, because guaranteed your trustee or your executor is going to need to rely on this clause. Okay, the next thing is to start a conversation. So you should be talking to your executors and giving them an idea of what sort of digital accounts, digital assets you have, especially if they might be more esoteric. So for example, if you're invested in cryptocurrency, but your executors are people who know nothing about cryptocurrency, that's a really good time to have a conversation with them and get them educated enough so that they'll know how to access and distribute those monies or cryptocurrencies. And in general, I'm just a huge proponent of having a conversation with your loved ones and your executor about what assets there are and how to access them, whether they're digital assets or otherwise. But asking someone to be your executor is a really huge job, and truthfully, a job people are feel quite honored to have, but really once they've done it, nobody wants the job again. So anything you can do to make that easier on them, they will be thanking you for it, even after you're gone, for sure. Okay, I think I've already said that. That is the presentation, as we're already at Q&A. If other people have some more questions, I'd love to answer them.
Okay, that's great. We do have a couple of questions here. One is, and so before I answer before I ask the question, just a reminder: please type your questions into the chat, and I'll be happy to ask them. The other thing is the video this presentation will be shared on the Institute for Healthy Living and Chronic Disease Prevention YouTube channel. So it'll be on YouTube. You can refer back to it. But here's the next question. Is there anything you shouldn't include in a will with digital assets?
Oh, great question. So you shouldn't include specifics, I think. So if you're going to detail all your digital assets, the place to do that is not in your will. Keep in mind that your will can become public, and so you don't want anything in your will that is revealing personal information or access. But any lawyer is not going to let you put all these details in your will anyway. So the place to store them is a platform like EstateBox or a side letter, something that someone can access, but is separate from your will.
Okay, great. Another question. Are there any considerations for digital assets for cases of estrangement or when older adults experience dementia?
Oh, that is interesting. I am not aware of them. If we're thinking cases like these court battles with Apple, I think incapacity is sort of a different situation, which dementia could be. And these platforms are often settling when people start making a big fuss because they don't want the media attention as well. So I'm not aware of any cases, but that's a really good question. I think what we've done with EstateBox is build a platform that gives your executor immediate access to all these details about your life, but also would give your trustee, or sometimes they're called your attorney, all these details in the event of incapacity. So I think finding a service like that can share not only in the event of your death, but in the event of some other situation is sort of key. Did that answer the question?
I think that the person who asked it, hopefully it did. If not, what we could get back. We could get back to them, but I see they just posted yes, thank you, that it did answer okay. The question. So I'm going to put one last call out for questions, but I do have another question here before as we go. So if somebody's written a book and it's saved in a Google Drive and it's not in their will, who would own that book?
So It doesn't need to be in their will specifically, book on Google Drive to form part of their estate. So their estate would own it, and it would have to be distributed. What's really interesting about situations like that is I would use the term artist assets. I'm not quite sure that's correct when you're an author, but author's assets is you really need to think through the value of that, because there could be quite a lot of value in that manuscript. And you should also think about who your executor is, and if they have the wherewithal, the knowledge to execute what you wanted with that manuscript. And so sometimes in wills, you might have different executors. So in this case, you might have a literary executor, which would be someone who had the knowledge to take that from a manuscript to publication and push it forward for the benefit of your beneficiaries. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Also, you might not have told anyone you ever wrote this book and it's stored in your Google Drive. And so sharing things like that with the people who are going to be there to clean up your estate or to receive the benefit of it is really important. And that's why, I say I'm a huge proponent of having that conversation.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Having that conversation with your family and loved ones is so important before you die, obviously. Another question we have is, what happens if my lawyer doesn't have experience with digital assets?
That's a great question. So I don't know that your lawyer actually needs to have experience. They need to be able to know enough to put in that clause in your will. But if you do have a lot of digital assets like cryptocurrency or manuscripts, like the example we were just talking about, you might want to find someone who is more has more expertise in those areas, because they will lead to different parts, different clauses in your will, perhaps, right? So I think any lawyer these days should have a digital assets clause in their standard form will. If they don't, please look for another one. But I don't think they need to have the expertise. The expertise is really required in the estate administration side, where people have to find those assets and figure out ways to distribute them.
Okay, great. Here's another question, and I'm gonna try to. This is the way I think I understand the question, and if I misread the question, if the person can go ahead and just correct me. But if I have a mobile phone and I've got pictures on the phone, can I leave the pictures to someone separately from my phone?
Oh, good question. So I think if you have a mobile phone, your pictures might be stored in the memory on your phone or in the cloud. So that probably depends. If you want to provide specific photos to someone specific, you would probably need a side letter in your will. But that is like a very specific, nuanced ask, I think. Yeah, but it also raises a good point, like having devices, tablets and laptops and computers, they kind of are the key to our digital asset inventory. And so if your loved ones or your executor can't even get into your phone or can't even get into your laptop, they really have no hope of finding a lot of things. And there are ways that people can try to get in, but if you've got adequate security on your devices, they might never be able to get in. So even sharing your details on how to get into your devices is important. Also, making sure that your loved ones, your executors know what your devices are is important. So, for example, I have two laptops. I have a personal one and a work one. And so most people might think I have one, but I actually do have two. So even things like that is important for your loved ones to know.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anjali. And it looks like that's the last of our questions for today. Oh, sorry, I've got another question just popped up. So the question is, why would social media accounts matter when estate planning?
Oh, this is a really good question. So I have an advisor, a friend who is a financial planner, advisor, wealth manager. And she always tells me this story about one of her clients who's an older woman. They were working on her taxes one day, and she said, "Oh, I also have this money from, let's call him Pepper. Pepper is her dog." And my friend says, "Well, what do you mean you have money from Pepper, the dog?" And she said, "Oh, well, Pepper is an influencer. So Pepper has an Instagram account, a Facebook account, all these accounts that generate revenue to this older woman." And so of course her wealth manager says, "Oh, you have to like account for that on your taxes." But more importantly, like, who's going to manage those social media accounts if something happens to you? What happens to Pepper's stream of income? So for most of us, they might not matter. Depends how invested we are in our social media presence. But there are a few scenarios, right? So if you or your children or your pet are an influencer, that could actually be the source of revenue for you, which might be very important to maintain. And just like total sidebar, but there's this new thing happening where younger couples, when they're getting together, they're not getting prenups, they're getting like co-parenting agreements in place for their pets because pets are influencers now. And so there is a lot of value in this influencing world. The other example would be your business accounts. So EstateBox, for example, has social media accounts on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, and those are of value to the company. So those are worth protecting as well. So like I said, it probably depends how invested you are in your own personal social media, but there are some interesting scenarios where you really do want to protect those assets.
Yeah, absolutely. We have come across that a number of times where people are earning an income off of the social media accounts.
Yeah, and there's stories of kids who earn like millions of dollars talking about toys. And so if you're the parent of one of those kids, you need to protect that asset as well for them and for your family. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And do you have a website for your EstateBox?
Yeah, it's just estatebox.ca.
Okay, terrific. EstateBox.ca. That's excellent. All right. Well, I think that concludes our discussion for today. We encourage everybody to attend the other events that we have with Okanagan Embrace Aging. I want to thank Anjali for her presentation today, and Jaquetta, who you don't see, but she's doing all of the work on the background. So thank you so much, Jaquetta. And please visit our website at OkanaganEmbraceAging.com. And we look forward to growing this event in the Okanagan and encourage anyone interested in supporting Embrace Aging in the future to please contact us. Contact information is available on our website. As a reminder, this will be shown on YouTube under the Institute for Healthy Living and Chronic Disease Prevention YouTube channel. And you will receive an email with a link to an online evaluation form, and we welcome everyone's feedback and suggestions for planning Embrace Aging events in the future. So thank you everyone for attending today.
Can I just add to that? So when Jaquetta sends out the survey, she'll also send out the handout that I mentioned, and I'll get my team to pull together a discount code in case anyone's interested too for checking out EstateBox as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for having me, Rod.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.